All right, how you guys doing today? We about to hop into a little reaction. The first things first, though, just make sure you like that video. You know, it'll exit full screen, scroll a bit, like it, and then full screen it back up. You feel me? So, transparency again, right? I don't really come with these videos. I just look at my YouTube recommended, and whatever pops up and looks interesting is something I want to learn about. We go ahead and watch it. So today we have this video from Cross Examine with Dr. Frank Turek. It is titled, "Was the Jesus Story Copied from Ancient Myths?" And I actually took a little mythology class not too long ago, aka last semester. Didn't really like the class, mostly because of the professor, and it was writing. But that aside, we read like Gilgamesh, we read some of the Greek mythology things, and I've actually heard this argument once before, I think, from one of my friends. I don't know. I think we watched a video that was semi-similar to it a while ago that was talking about like how Jesus ranks up against all the other deities in different religions, and how Jesus is like the culmination of every single one of their attributes, but they all can't touch Jesus on any type of scale for real. So we're gonna see what this video is talking about, just to give ourselves a little bit of context and another defendable point if somebody brings this up to us against our argument of our faith and testimonies. So without further ado, let's check it out.
There's been many religions before Christianity.
Yes.
And they all had the same story as Jesus. Some like there was the son of God, what's his name, was Kronos or it started with a K.
Mithras.
Yeah, and it was way before Jesus was born.
Okay.
And he died 3 days later, resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
And he was born on December 25th. And I was just telling my friend, I was like, okay, what's your point? And he was like, bro, like all this stuff happened way before Jesus. So yeah.
First of all, let me say this. When somebody says something, it's not your job to refute what they say. It's their job to support what they say. So when he says all this stuff is true about Mithras, first question you want to ask is, what do you mean by that? Okay? Because you need clarification.
Right.
The second question is, how did you come to that conclusion? In other words, what evidence do you have for this being true? Because searching the internet doesn't necessarily give you the right evidence. There's a lot of misinformation out there, okay?
Right.
And then the third question is, have you ever considered, and then you provide some evidence back to that person after they try to affirm their own view. And what I would say to somebody who said that Mithras was someone who predated Jesus, and therefore you're saying that what, Jesus borrowed, the New Testament writers borrowed from it, and they invented it? Here's the truth about Mithras. Number one, it's too late to influence Christianity because it's after Christianity. It's not before. If anybody took anything from anybody, it was Mithras taking it from Christianity, not the other way around. Secondly, he was born out of a rock, not a virgin. Thirdly, he was said to be a god, not a teacher. He didn't have 12 disciples. Number four, he didn't sacrifice himself. He sacrificed a bull. And finally, we don't know anything about his death. There was no resurrection. So just because some website somewhere says all this stuff doesn't mean it's true.
Okay. But Egypt is older than, well, the hieroglyphics in, oh, my bad. The hieroglyphics in Egypt is older.
Yes, oh yeah, the people that predated Jesus, we know that. There were religions prior to Jesus. But even if there were similarities, that doesn't mean that one copied from another. In fact, let me ask you guys this. Tell me what ship this was. There was a ship that went on its maiden voyage from Europe that came across the Atlantic. It didn't have enough lifeboats on it. It happened about a century ago. It hit an iceberg.
Titanic.
It sank, and a lot of people died. That ship was false. It's not what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of a ship called The Futility, which was a novel written in 1898 with the exact same or many of the same details that occurred to the Titanic 14 years later.
Wow.
Now, no one's going to say because The Futility, a fictional novel, was written 14 years before the Titanic, that all news reports of the Titanic must be false. They must be borrowed from this novel, right? So just
Right.
because there's similarities, if there are, doesn't mean that one is borrowed from another. Make sense?
Gotcha.
All right, thanks, George. And by the way, this is good. No, I got you. I'm done. I'm good. I'm just going to mention one other thing, and that is these questions are very important. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered? They're all from Greg Koukl's book, Tactics. If you haven't read that book, you need to read it. They're also in our app, the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store. So you should always ask those questions. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered? Now, ladies and gentlemen, these questions you can use for anything, not just questions about Christianity or anything else. Like parents, if your son calls you one night and says, Dad, I'm not going to be home by 11 like you wanted me to, don't panic. First question, what do you mean by that? Second question, how'd you come to that conclusion? Third question, have you ever considered if you're not home by 11, you're grounded for 2 weeks? Be right home, Dad. Right? By the way, husbands, never, ever, ever use these questions on your wives.
Right.
Because if she calls you an idiot, don't say, what do you mean by that? Or, how did you come to that conclusion? She's going to have a list 25 years long, and you are toast. All right? Thank you, George. Thank you.
I've watched a lot of Dr. Frank Turry videos, and honestly, that's the first time I've ever heard him talk about the futility and the Titanic. And that's such a great answer, because if we even fact check this, Futility of the Wreck of the Titan was written before the Titanic sank, published in 1898, 14 years before it sank in 1912. 14 years before the Titanic went on her fatal voyage, right? And I guess nobody would dare to say that the Titanic was just based off this. Is why would they want to recreate that? Same way, why would people want to, I mean, I guess, there's better reasoning for recreating a God story, but at the same time, you look at it like nobody would say the Titanic's false because it came after. Same way you'd be like, well, Jesus came after, so it's false. Like, it's a really great answer. And even when people want to compare, you can break down the specifics. Well, tell me about this person, and his 3 questions are very good. I don't want to discredit that at all, but also you can ask them questions. How much have you studied this? What did this person do in this instance? What happened here? What happened here? And then they're going to list off what they heard and blah, 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 blah. And eventually they're going to get to a stale point. I'm going to say, have you studied this in depth? No. What do you mean that? Have you considered this and everything else in between? Like, they're not going to be able to give you a definitive answer. Same way they're not going to be able to give you a definitive answer on Jesus because they didn't even study it. They just like to point out how false it is, going off their one-liners and their two-liners. Same way that, you can go off anything. You can do a quick Google search. It took people forever to find out that eggs were actually good for us and not bad for us, because they were just like, this is an egg, it's bad. Same way they thought that but fat was causing fat when really it was like sugar, and fat was just like just has more calories than protein and carbs. So with anything, there's a grain of sand to be taken with it, and you got to study to understand. And how do we study? We read God's word, and read God's word, you understand, and that's where the wisdom comes in. That's why we're in the book of Proverbs. So study, come up with your answers to these questions, because people are going to test your faith all the time. Some people are going to test your faith, and some people are going to be looking for your faith. And you have to be willing to defend yourself against those who are testing your faith, and be willing to share your faith with those inquiring about it. Because if somebody came up to you and say, why do you believe what you believe? And you just say, or even, well, I was raised in it and it just seems right. Because then they're going to be on the fence about asking you about it, 1, or 2, they might become one of those people that's going to attack and say, well, what about evolution? You were raised with that, weren't you? And then you're going to sit there like, but God seems legit, so I follow him. Like, no, you got to be willing to have deep, articulate answers for these questions, because your faith, it's your faith. You seek Jesus because we love him. He seeks us when we seek him. All right, that's going to be the end of the video. I hope you guys have yourselves a fantastic rest of your day. Peace.